the gun and look down at ace king offsuit. I put in a raise to 2600. Now it folds to the player in the cutoff, who is leaning back, and then once he sees his hand, sits up in his chair. It was very obvious that he liked his hand, especially when he decided to 3-bet to 10k. Here at Hilton Prague, some of the best players from across Europe and around the world have gathered for the WSOPE 5300 Euro main event. With 4 1-hour levels to go on day 1, there was still plenty of poker left to be played. And after running like an absolute god during the first few levels in the last episode, I had built up one of the bigger stacks in the room. But after getting moved to a new table, I was suddenly out of the comfort zone I had settled into earlier that day. Now it was time to readjust, study a whole new lineup of opponents, and start gathering fresh reads all over again. So I'm sitting on 200,000 in chips. The blinds are 501,000. The first hand I get dealt on this table, I'm in the big blind and look down at 3-4 offsuit. It folds all the way around to the small blind, who decides to just limp. Having just sat down and with no information about this player, I decide to check and see a flop. The flop comes 3 of clubs, 4 of diamonds, 9 of spades. A great flop for my hand as I flop bottom 2 pair. My opponent decides to check. I go ahead and put out a bet for 1500, and he does decide to put in the call. The turn is the 5 of diamonds. The small blind checks again, and here I obviously can keep betting for value. This turn card is slightly concerning as hands like ace deuce, 6-7, 4-5 are now all beating my bottom 2 pair. However, this is small blind versus big blind, so ranges are extremely wide. I decide to put in another bet, this time to 4,000. My opponent thinks about it for a bit and decides to call again. The river is the 7 of diamonds, now putting both a one-liner to the straight as well as completing the backdoor diamond draw. Hands like 4-6, 5-6 have now made a straight, and hands like 3x of diamonds, 9x of diamonds have now made a flush. So when my opponent checks again, I'm happy to check it back. And luckily I did, as he turns over king queen of diamonds. So even though my opponent outdrew me in this one, he gets absolutely no value for his hand, and I'm able to get some valuable information against my opponent here. Next hand, blinds are now 600, 1200. I'm under the gun and look down at ace king offsuit. I put in a raise to 2600. Now it folds to the player in the cutoff, who is leaning back, and then once he sees his hand, sits up in his chair. It was very obvious that he liked his hand, especially when he decided to 3-bet to 10k. Folds around back to me. Now here with ace king, I think there's a couple ways to play it. Being out of position, one of the ways to negate some of my opponent's positional advantage is to lower the SPR post-flop by putting in another raise pre-flop. However, in this case, with no information about my opponent, except that he's about 60 big blinds deep, that he really likes his hand, and that he's 3-betting my under the gun raise, I didn't think that a 4-bet was going to accomplish much except to blow the pot against a strong range that probably isn't folding. So I put in the call, and we go heads up to the flop of 4 of clubs, 10 of spades, 10 of hearts. I check it over to my opponent, who decides to make a c-bet of 6k. I don't have a heart in my hand, but facing such a small bet, I'm getting great odds, so I do put in the call. The turn is the 9 of hearts. I decide to check, and now my opponent checks back. The river is the deuce of clubs. I decide to check, and he decides to check it back again. I turn my hand over, and turns out he had the same hand, he's king. So nothing that exciting about a chop pot, but I think it's really worth paying attention to just his overall approach on this board texture, using information like this in standard hands to start building reads on your opponents. That way when a more non-standard spot comes up, you'll have a better understanding on your opponent's strategy. Next hand, I'm under the gun again, and this time I pick up pocket queens. I raise it up to 2700. The player under the gun +1 on my direct left calls, and so does the big blind to my right. We go 3 ways to the flop of king of spades, jack of spades, 10 of hearts. The big blind checks. Now I do flop an open-ended straight draw on a board that hits my opening range, but this is also a board that connects well with the flat caller's range to my left. However, after making a c-bet of 2200, he does fold. The big blind, however, makes the call. The turn is the 10 of spades, and now the big blind decides to lead for 4,000. He can certainly have some trip 10s in his range here as well as some flushes, but holding the queen of spades and facing this size, I have an easy call. The river is the 10 of clubs, putting a third 10 on the board, making it much less likely he's holding the last 10 in the deck. I am also now beating all combos of flushes, but still losing if he has a king. However, when he decides to check, I take the hand to showdown, and he turns over ace of spades, 9 of diamonds. After seeing this hand, I see that this 10 actually saved me a tough river decision, as it made it really difficult for him to continue bluffing. He knows that if I have a king, I'm never folding to any bet, and so his ace of spades blocker becomes pretty useless on this run out. In the next couple hands, I end up bleeding off some valuable chips. In the first one, I call a raise with king 10 suited versus the player under the gun, but the player in the big blind ends up squeezing. I decided to let it go, with the main reason being that the under the gun opener is quite short stacked, and so it makes it much more likely that the squeezer has a very strong hand since he's pot committing himself versus the original raiser. And in the next hand, I open queen 10 offsuit in the cutoff. The button calls, and the same player who squeezed from the big blind last hand is now in the small blind and decides to 3-bet squeeze again. And now it's the short stacks player's big blind. So just like in the last hand, with this dynamic of having a short stack in the hand with chips already invested in the pot, it just increases the likelihood of the squeezer having a hand that he's willing to call it off with. A lot of times, just from having a short stack still in the pot, players are in a way forced to play much more honestly, and we're able to get away from marginal spots versus our opponent's big hands. Next hand, blinds are up, 1,000, 2,000. I look down at king 6 of spades in the big blind. It folds around to the button, makes a raise to 4,500. The small blind makes the call. I toss in the call as well. We go to the flop of ace of spades, jack of clubs, 7 of hearts. The small blind checks. With just a backdoor flush draw and straight draw, I check as well, and so does the button. We go to the turn, which is the jack of spades, now giving me the backdoor nut flush draw. The small blind now decides to lead out for 10,500. I think this is a great spot to put in a raise. After the original raiser preflop has shown weakness by checking back the flop, the small blind is now more incentivized to lead the turn and does not need to have a strong hand here to bet. If he doesn't have a jack, by raising here, he's going to have a tough time continuing with one more street of play. And of course, with the backdoor flush draw, I do have some outs to improve in case he did have trip jacks or an ace that decided to get sticky. I put in the raise to 26,000. The button folds, the small blind quickly folds as well. So it's nice to pick this pot up without even having to see a river. So day 1 is about to end, as we're instructed to play just a few more hands, and in one of the last hands I get dealt, I look down at spades and aces in the cutoff. I raise it up to 4,000, the small blind folds, and the big blind in seat 7, who was still short stacked with about 20 big blinds, makes the call. The flop comes 10 of clubs, queen of spades, 4 of clubs. The big blind checks. I make a c-bet of 5,500, and he quickly mucks.
Goodbye.
Huh? Just one pair only.
Eight. I was going out. 1-1. 7.
One pair.
First time in my life.
You have what?
7. First time in my life.
Sevens?
I really want to play the 2K tomorrow. I'm not going to put the last game.
So having aces here felt like quite a waste, as many players with 20 big blinds would have gladly shoved pocket sevens pre-flop, especially at the end of the day, since they'd rather take a shot at doubling up or busting. But this specific player really wanted to survive day 2, which led me to win the minimum. Sometimes the variance comes in the form of spots where all the chips are supposed to go in, but they don't for some reason. After a long grind, I think everyone was just relieved to finally make it through day 1. The earlier part of the day had gone really well for me, with several big pots helping me build my stack. But once I got moved to the second table, the dynamic changed quite a bit. Things slowed down, and instead of accumulating chips through huge hands, the focus shifted towards preserving my stack and navigating the rising blinds carefully. So by the end of the night, I managed to bag an above average stack of 195,000 in chips, which will be 78 big blinds when day 2 begins at the 1,500, 2,500 blind level. Having a healthy stack heading into day 2 should give me plenty of flexibility once play resumes.
喜欢我的影片，不要忘记按赞、订阅、打开小铃铛。